While cannons roared and bombs exploded, in the shadow of the Great War, another battle unfolded for the preservation of the nation's cultural memory. Its soldiers were people accustomed to working with brushes and scalpels, not automatic rifles. Archaeologists, museum workers, art historians. These custodians of history found themselves on the front lines of the fight for their ancestors' heritage. When fascists methodically destroyed and plundered the treasures of Russian culture, these people, often unarmed, resisted barbarism with their own courage and professionalism. They hid exhibits in basements, buried ancient artifacts in the ground, and evacuated collections under bombardment. In besieged Leningrad, employees of the Hermitage, exhausted by hunger, continued to catalog exhibits in frozen halls. In occupied territories, museum workers kept secret lists of looted valuables, risking their lives. Their feat remains in the shadow of military history, although it is precisely thanks to them that we can today see masterpieces that survived the fire of war. This is a story about those who fought not for territories, but for the soul of the people, embodied in its cultural heritage. June 22, 1941, forever changed the fate not only of millions of people, but also of the priceless treasures of Russian culture. When the first German bombs fell on Soviet cities at 4 in the morning, employees of museums and archaeological institutes did not yet know that they would have to accomplish the impossible: to save the national heritage from destruction. In the Hermitage, the alarm sounded in the very first days of the war. Director Josef Orbeli gathered his staff and uttered a historic phrase: "We will save everything." Within days, scientific workers transformed into loaders, carpenters, and packers. Women art historians, with delicate hands accustomed to carefully handling antiquities, now hammered together crates, wrapping fragile exhibits in cloth and paper. The first echelon with the Hermitage's treasures departed for the Urals on June 30th, just 8 days after the war began. The train traveled under bombing, along a route that constantly changed due to the advance of German troops. In the carriages, amidst paintings by Rembrandt and Leonardo da Vinci, museum employees traveled, custodians who did not abandon their exhibits even under threat of death. The situation in the Russian museum was no less dramatic. Senior researcher Anna Petrova Dubrovskaya personally accompanied the evacuated collection of Russian painting. When the train came under bombing, she shielded the crates with paintings by Rapin and Surikov with her own body. Later she recalled, "I was not thinking of death, but of the fact that if I perish, it is one life. But if these paintings perish, it is a loss for all generations." In Novgorod, museum staff literally carried icons out of the burning St. Sophia Cathedral. The unique 12th century frescoes could not be evacuated. They were photographed, sketched, every detail documented, understanding that tomorrow they might no longer exist. Young archaeologist Artemy Artsikovsky, who later became famous for discovering birch bark manuscripts, organized a group of students who, under his guidance, made tracings of ancient frescoes. Keepers of small provincial museums, who did not have the means to evacuate their collections, showed particular ingenuity. In Pskov, the director of the Historical and Art Museum, Sofia Melnikova, with the help of local residents, immured the most valuable exhibits in the walls of an ancient cellar. In Smolensk, archaeologists buried artifacts in the ground, camouflaging the burial sites as vegetable beds. Not everything could be saved. The first months of the war brought catastrophic losses. The unique collection of the Vitebsk Museum was completely destroyed. During the bombing of Kiev, the historical museum with priceless Scythian gold artifacts burned down. But even under these conditions, Scientists did not give up. They compiled detailed descriptions of what was lost to preserve at least the memory of cultural treasures. The evacuation of the Pushkin Museum in Moscow became a true feat. Director Sergei Merkurov decided to transport exhibits on barges along the Moscow-Volga Canal. When German aviation began to bomb the waterway, custodians reloaded crates with paintings onto trucks and transported them along country roads, bypassing bombed sections. Thus, in constant motion, changing routes, they saved the heritage of world culture. By the end of 1942, when the scale of cultural heritage looting in occupied territories became evident, the Red Army leadership decided to establish specialized units for the protection and inventory of monuments. These groups received the unofficial name Cultural Landing Force and were formed predominantly from professional archaeologists, art historians, and museum workers called up for active military service. One of the initiators of these units was academician Igor Grabar, who, in a memorandum to the State Defense Committee, justified the necessity of including art history specialists in the advancing troops. He wrote, "Every day of delay means the loss of priceless treasures that can be destroyed both by the retreating enemy and during combat operations." In January 1943, the Commission for the Protection of Art and Antiquities Monuments was established under the People's Commissariat of Defense, comprising leading scientists of the country. The Commission developed instructions for troops on how to handle historical objects during the liberation of cities and settlements. The first special groups for monument protection were formed by the spring of 1943 and attached to front headquarters. Their tasks included prompt surveying of liberated territories, drawing up reports of destruction and theft, organizing the safeguarding of surviving cultural objects, and providing first aid to damaged monuments. Professor of Archaeology Pavel Schultz, who before the war led excavations in Crimea, headed one of the first such groups on the Southern Front. Instead of the usual archaeologist's field equipment, he now wore an officer's uniform with captain's epaulets. In his frontline diaries, Schultz wrote, "It's a strange feeling to follow the traces of war not with a weapon, but with a notepad. But our task is no less important. We are saving the soul of the people." Mobile restoration workshops were established with each group, equipped with necessary materials for the conservation of damaged artifacts. The groups had the right to involve engineering units for emergency work to strengthen ruined buildings of historical value. One of the first operations of these special groups was the rescue of the collections of the Kursk Regional Museum in March 1943. A group led by art historian Nikolai Cherkasov literally followed the retreating German troops into the half-destroyed city and discovered exhibits hidden by staff in the museum's basement. For 3 days, while the city was still under artillery fire, Cherkasov's group cataloged, packed, and transported more than 2,000 art objects to the rear. Gradually, the work of these units became more systemic. Liaison officers from among art historians appeared at the headquarters of each front, coordinating the actions of special groups with military operations. This allowed them to receive information about planned offensives in advance and prepare lists of cultural objects in the combat zone. September 9th, 1941. The blockade ring closed around Leningrad. The most terrible 900 days in the city's history began. But even in these inhumane conditions, scientific life continued, and with it, the struggle to preserve cultural heritage. In the frozen halls of the Hermitage, where temperatures dropped to -15 degrees, emaciated staff continued to catalog the exhibits that had not been evacuated in time. Anna Izergina, curator of the Western European Painting Department, wrote in her diary, "Surprisingly, archaeological research continued even in the besieged city. When an aerial bomb collapsed part of the wall of the Peter and Paul fortress, archaeologist Anatoly Grach, himself on the verge of exhaustion, organized rescue excavations. Under shelling, he and two of his colleagues explored the exposed 18th-century cultural layer, extracting and documenting artifacts from the Petrine era. At the public library, staff, despite hunger, continued to compile a card catalog of the city's destroyed historical buildings. Maria Konopleva, head of the manuscript department, collected the diaries of Leningraders, understanding their immense historical value. She later recalled, "We were saving not only stones and books, we were saving memory." The staff of the Russian Museum, led by Pyotr Baltun, organized constant duty in the halls where unevacuated exhibits were stored. During air raids, they extinguished incendiary bombs falling on the building's roof. Once, Baltun, exhausted from hunger, lost consciousness right while fighting a fire. His colleagues, barely standing themselves, carried him out of the burning room and saved priceless canvases. At the Hermitage, director Iosif Orbeli decided to continue scientific meetings even during the most difficult days of the blockade. Art historian Vladimir Levinson-Lessing recalled, "In April 1942, archaeologist Mikhail Artamonov, future director of the Hermitage, organized an expedition to survey the suburban palaces destroyed by German bombing. A group of exhausted scientists reached Pushkin and Pavlovsk by hitchhiking on military vehicles, where they compiled the first acts of destruction and rescued fragments of stucco and parquet from under the rubble. According to the participants' recollections, this expedition required superhuman effort. Every step was difficult due to dystrophy." Many archaeologists and museum workers did not live to see the end of the blockade. Alexei Ilyin, curator of the Hermitage's numismatics department, died of exhaustion right at his desk, cataloging coins. His colleague Sergei Troinitsky, a leading specialist in applied art, died in his office, where he had lived for the last months to be closer to the collection. But there were also those whom work itself saved. Archaeologist Mikhail Tikhanova later admitted, "I survived only because every morning I forced myself to go to the institute and work on a manuscript about Gothic antiquities. This gave purpose, meaning to each day." Even during the most difficult months of the blockade, scientific discussions continued in the city. In the frozen premises of the Institute of the History of Material Culture in February 1942, a scientific conference was held, at which the prospects for the post-war restoration of architectural monuments were discussed. Scientists believed in victory and prepared for it. When the Nazis seized Soviet cities and towns, they not only established a regime of terror for the population, but also methodically plundered cultural treasures. Behind this was an entire system. Special units of the Ahnenerbe and Rosenberg's staff, which purposefully removed museum valuables, archives, and libraries. But even under these conditions, the unnoticed but heroic work of those who could not or did not want to evacuate continued. Museum, library, and archive staff. In occupied Kyiv, the custodian of St. Sophia Cathedral, Alexei Povstenko, created a secret archive, recording all instances of the removal of valuables. Every evening, he recorded which exhibits were seized, who led the process, and the numbers of the vehicles carrying away the loot. He hid these records in a cache built into the wall of the ancient temple. After the war, his documents became invaluable evidence at the Nuremberg trials. In Novgorod, Anna Strokova, an employee of the Historical Museum, organized a real underground repository. When it became clear that it was impossible to evacuate all exhibits, she, with the help of local residents, hid the most valuable items in the basements of destroyed buildings, camouflaging the entrances under rubble. The Germans were never able to discover these caches. Anna was captured by the Gestapo after a denunciation, but even under torture, she did not reveal the location of the treasures. Miraculously surviving after the city's liberation, she personally pointed out the locations of all 37 caches. In Crimea, archaeologist Pavel Schultz, who remained under occupation, managed to preserve most of the collection of the Kerch Museum under the guise of collaborating with German specialists. He deliberately directed the occupation search parties along false routes, leading them away from the actual burial sites of valuables. When the Germans demanded excavations of Scythian burial mounds, Schultz organized work on already explored sites where valuable finds could not possibly be. In Smolensk, Vera Zvezdaeva, the director of the art gallery, created an underground group of former museum workers. They kept records of the paintings being removed by the Germans, secretly took photographs of the process of loading valuables, and copied documents for their removal. This information was transmitted to Moscow via partisans, which later made it possible to track the path of many stolen masterpieces. Employees of small provincial museums showed particular ingenuity. In the city of Oster, Chernihiv region, the curator of the local history museum, Nikolai Gerbel, replaced valuable exhibits with dummies and hid the originals in an abandoned well on the outskirts of the city. When a German officer from Rosenberg's staff arrived for an inspection, he did not even notice the substitution. In Pskov, the Germans set up a warehouse for looted goods from surrounding estates and monasteries in the Pogankin chambers. Former museum employee Ivan Larionov, appointed as a guard by the Germans, secretly compiled an inventory of the valuables being brought in. Every evening, he recorded new arrivals, and he hid the slips of paper with his notes in the cracks between the ancient logs of the building. These records became the basis for post-war restitution claims. In Minsk, employees of the Academy of Sciences created an underground group to save library collections. When the Germans began to remove rare books and manuscripts, librarians secretly replaced the most valuable copies with less significant additions in similar bindings. Over 3 years of occupation, they managed to save more than 2,000 rare editions, including unique Belarusian incunabula. By the spring of 1944, as Soviet troops confidently advanced westward, the country's leadership recognized the need to create special units for the search and return of stolen cultural property. Thus was born the operation. Unofficially named Special Brigades were formed within the advancing armies, comprising archaeologists, art historians, and museum workers who donned military uniforms. Their task was unique, moving directly behind the front lines to identify and rescue the treasures of Russian culture stolen by the Nazis. Archaeologist Sergei Yushkov, who led one such brigade, wrote in his field diary, "The work of the trophy brigades resembled a real intelligence operation. They interrogated local residents, studied abandoned German documents, and inspected cellars and bunkers where stolen valuables might be stored." In Pskov, a brigade led by art historian Mikhail Alpatov discovered crates with icons from the Novgorod and Pskov museums in an abandoned mine. The Germans had not managed to remove them during their retreat. The brigade members, risking their lives, descended into the semi-flooded mine and brought to the surface over 100 priceless monuments of ancient Russian art. In Minsk, a trophy brigade, after studying captured documents from Rosenberg's headquarters, was able to establish the routes for the removal of library collections. Following these traces, they reached a small Polish town, where, in a church basement, they discovered rare manuscripts and incunabula from the Belarusian Academy of Sciences. The work of the trophy brigades was particularly difficult in Germany. When Soviet troops crossed the Reich's border, the scale of the search operation increased manifold. The Nazis hid looted valuables in salt mines, abandoned castles, and underground bunkers. Archaeologist Alexander Bryusov, brother of the famous poet, led a group that, through a complex chain of clues, traced the collection of the Catherine Palace, including the famous Amber Room. In May 1945, when fighting was still raging in the streets of Berlin, a huge collection of jewels from Soviet museums was discovered in the basements of the Reichsbank. Art historian Natalia Sokolova, who participated in this operation, recalled, "When we opened the heavy doors of the vault, we were faced with a breathtaking sight. Thousands of gold and silver items, precious stones, ancient coins. Everything that had been removed from our museums lay here, prepared for shipment in an unknown direction." The work of the trophy brigades continued even after the end of the war. Many archaeologists and art historians remained with the occupation forces, continuing the search for stolen treasures. They compiled detailed catalogs of their findings, organized temporary storage facilities, and prepared the valuables for shipment back home. Thanks to their meticulous work, over 2 million works of art and antiquities stolen from the territory of the Soviet Union were returned. War not only destroys but also reveals. This paradoxical truth is well known to archaeologists who worked in frontline areas. When the earth was turned over by explosions, along with pain and death, evidence of past eras, hidden for centuries, came to the surface. In 1942, Professor Victor Golmston, while serving with engineering units near Rzhev, discovered fragments of 12th century pottery in freshly dug trenches. Despite regular shelling, he organized a small research group of soldiers interested in history. Between battles, they expanded and deepened one of the trenches, turning it into a real archaeological excavation. The artifacts found allowed them to precisely locate a settlement previously known only from chronicle mentions. Near Smolensk, archaeologist Evgeny Schmidt, serving in a sapper battalion, used craters from aerial bombs to study the cultural layers of the ancient city. In his frontline diary, he wrote, "War gave us a terrible but unique chance to see cross-sections of the cultural layer, inaccessible in peacetime. Every explosion is an involuntary excavation, and our duty is not only to fight, but also to preserve the knowledge that war accidentally brings to the surface." In Kerch, liberated from German troops in April 1944, a group of archaeologists led by Vladimir Blavatsky was included in sapper units clearing the city. When sappers discovered a hidden cache of ancient vases concealed from the occupiers in one of the basements, Blavatsky organized their urgent study and evacuation. But the most astonishing discovery occurred when fragments of a Hellenistic marble statue, a previously unknown masterpiece of ancient Greek art, were found during the clearing of rubble from a destroyed house. Women played a special role in wartime rescue archaeology. Tatiana Pasek, a well-known specialist in the Tripillian culture, led an expedition in 1943 to the recently liberated regions of Ukraine. Under her leadership, urgent excavations of bomb-damaged kurgans were carried out in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Working practically without equipment, using soldiers' shovels instead of archaeological tools, the expedition discovered a unique Scythian burial with gold jewelry, which could have been looted or destroyed in further hostilities. In Novgorod, where the historical center was turned into ruins, archaeologist Artemy Artsikovsky created a methodology of archaeology of destruction. His group meticulously recorded all cultural layers exposed as a result of bombings and shelling. Thanks to this work, the topography of the medieval city was significantly refined, and previously unknown 12th century defensive structures were discovered. Archaeologists later recalled, "In peacetime, it would have taken years of excavations and enormous resources to obtain the amount of information that war provided us in a few months, at the terrible cost of destroying a historical city." Near Leningrad, in the area of the Pulkovo Heights, where the defense line passed, military engineer and amateur archaeologist Pavel Rapoport discovered fragments of ancient Russian birch bark letters in a dugout. This discovery allowed for the establishment of an ancient settlement at this location, unknown from written sources. A unique example of military field archaeology was the work of a group led by Professor Boris Rybakov in liberated Kiev. When fragments of ancient frescoes were discovered during the clearing of rubble from St. Sophia Cathedral, Rybakov organized their systematic study. Working under partial shelling, the front was only a few dozen kilometers away, the group made a sensational discovery. Previously unknown frescoes from the time of Yaroslav the Wise were preserved under a layer of 17th century plaster. War destroys not only human lives but also the cultural heritage of entire nations. When the guns fall silent, it is important not only to count the human losses, but also to assess the damage inflicted on historical monuments. This was precisely the task of special scientific commissions, created even in the midst of hostilities. Their work was as important as the feats on the front line. They fought for memory, for the cultural code of the nation. In February 1942, the Commission for the Registration and Protection of Art Monuments was established at the USSR Academy of Sciences. It included leading historians, archaeologists, and art critics. The commission was headed by academician Igor Grabar, an outstanding restorer and art historian. Under his leadership, methods for documenting destruction were developed, which were not just to record losses, but to create a scientific basis for future restoration. We must record not only what is destroyed, but also exactly how it is destroyed, Grabar said at the first meeting of the commission. This required a systemic approach and scientific rigor, even in the face of ongoing hostilities. In liberated cities, special teams of documentarians worked. They drew up acts of destruction, measured damaged buildings, and photographed ruins from different angles. Art critic Nikolai Voronin, who worked in Novgorod, wrote in his memoirs, "We photographed every surviving fragment of a fresco, every piece of a column. It was the work of an investigator at a crime scene. We collected evidence against barbarism." In Pskov, a team of restorers led by Yuri Spagalsky created a unique method for documenting destroyed monuments. They not only took photographs, but also detailed architectural drawings on which surviving and destroyed elements of buildings were marked in different colors. These drawings subsequently became invaluable material for restorers. In Leningrad, despite the ongoing blockade, architect Nikolai Belikov organized a group that documented the condition of suburban palaces. Risking their lives under shelling, they penetrated the ruined Tsarskoye Selo, Peterhof, and Pavlovsk palaces, compiling detailed inventories of damage. Particular attention was paid to creating registers of lost museum valuables. In each liberated city, special commissions compared pre-war inventory books with what remained after the occupation. This was meticulous work, requiring the highest qualifications. In Kiev, art critic Polina Kulzhenko reconstructed from memory a catalog of art museum exhibits taken by the Germans. She remembered the location of each painting, its dimensions and features. In 1943, the Extraordinary State Commission for Ascertaining and Investigating the Atrocities of the German fascist invaders was established. One of its areas of work was the accounting of destroyed cultural values. The Commission developed special questionnaires for documenting the state of historical and cultural monuments, which were filled out in every liberated settlement. A unique document of the era was the Atlas of Destruction, created under the leadership of art critic Alexei Shchusev. It collected photographs, drawings, and descriptions of all significant architectural monuments affected by the war. This atlas became not only a testament to barbarism, but also a guide to action for future generations of restorers. An important part of the work was documenting the state of archaeological sites. In Kerch, archaeologist Viktor Gaidukevich documented the destruction of the ancient city of Pantikapaum. He not only drew up acts, but also conducted urgent excavations in places where bombing had exposed ancient cultural layers. Behind every rescued artifact, behind every returned painting, stood specific individuals. Scholars who had dedicated their lives to studying the past, but, by fate, found themselves at the forefront of the battle for cultural heritage. Their personal stories are not just biographies, but chronicles of courage and devotion to their cause. Artemy Vladimirovich Artsikovsky, a renowned archaeologist and specialist in ancient Russian culture, met the war already as an acclaimed scholar. In the early days of the war, he voluntarily joined the People's Militia, but was soon recalled by special order. His knowledge was more needed in saving cultural values. Heading a special group at the headquarters of the Western Front, Artsikovsky developed a method for rapid fixation and conservation of archaeological finds in combat conditions. After the war, he led the famous Novgorod expedition, which revealed birch bark manuscripts to the world, a unique source of knowledge about the daily life of medieval Rus. "The war taught me to value every fragment of the past," Artsikovsky told his students in the post-war years. "When you see monuments that have stood for centuries disappear in a few minutes of bombing, you begin to understand the true value of archaeological evidence." The fate of Maria Veniaminovna Farmakovskaya unfolded differently. A talented art historian, a specialist in ancient Russian painting, she remained in occupied Kiev to preserve what could not be evacuated. Organizing an underground group of former museum employees, she kept secret records of valuables being taken by the Germans. Risking her life, Farmakovskaya infiltrated the storage facilities set up by the occupiers and sketched exhibits prepared for shipment to Germany. After the liberation of Kiev, her records helped identify and return hundreds of works of art. But Maria Veniaminovna herself was subjected to repression. She was accused of collaborating with the occupiers. Only in 1956 was she fully rehabilitated and able to return to scientific work. Her monograph, Icons of Kievan Rus, published in 1962, became a classic work on the history of ancient Russian art. A special page in the history of frontline archaeology is the fate of Tatiana Sergeyevna Pasek. An outstanding archaeologist and researcher of the Tripilya culture, at the beginning of the war, she headed a group for the evacuation of archaeological collections from Kiev. Under bombings, in the last days before the city's surrender, her team removed invaluable artifacts, including unique Tripilya figurines and ceramics. In 1943, immediately after the liberation of Left Bank Ukraine, Pasek organized the first post-war archaeological expedition. In the field, often to the distant sounds of cannon fire, she and her colleagues excavated ancient settlements destroyed by bombings. Pasek wrote in her memoirs, quote, "For Viktor Ivanovich Ravdonikas, the foremost specialist in the archaeology of Northwest Russia, spent the entire blockade in Leningrad. Despite dystrophy and constant bombings, he continued to work, cataloging collections, writing scientific papers, and in rare hours of calm, conducting excavations at sites of destruction. In February 1942, during the most terrible period of the blockade, Ravdonikas organized a scientific conference in the frozen building of the Hermitage. Exhausted scholars discussed the prospects for post-war research, made plans for expeditions, and spoke about the future of science. This was their way of resisting death and despair. After the war, Ravdonikas led large-scale excavations in Staraya Ladoga, laying the foundations for modern understanding of the early history of Rus. His students formed the elite of post-war Soviet archaeology. The legacy of frontline archaeologists and museum workers during the Great Patriotic War extends far beyond their immediate feats. Their experience became the foundation of the modern system for protecting cultural heritage in zones of armed conflict. The methods of urgent evacuation, documentation of destruction, and rescue of artifacts developed in those terrible years are now used by specialists worldwide. In 1954, largely thanks to the lessons of the Second World War, the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict was adopted. This document, for the first time at an international level, enshrined the principles that guided Soviet scientists in saving cultural heritage. Cultural property belongs to all humanity. Its protection is the duty of warring parties, and the deliberate destruction of monuments is a war crime. In subsequent decades, the experience of frontline archaeologists was systematized and formed the basis of UNESCO protocols for the protection of world heritage. A crucial principle became preventive documentation, the creation of detailed descriptions, photographs, and drawings of monuments before the start of a conflict, so that, in case of destruction, restoration would be possible. Modern technologies have significantly expanded the possibilities for protecting cultural heritage. Three-dimensional scanning, satellite monitoring, digital databases, all this allows for the preservation of information about monuments even in the event of their physical destruction. But technological progress does not negate the main lesson of frontline archaeologists. People, their courage and dedication, play a decisive role. Unfortunately, the experience of protecting cultural heritage in wartime remains relevant today. The destruction of ancient monuments in Palmyra, Syria, the destruction of museums in Mosul, Iraq, the damage to historical buildings in Ukraine. All this reminds us that cultural heritage continues to be a victim of armed conflicts. In 2015, when ISIS militants began the systematic destruction of Palmyra's monuments, Mikhail Piotrowski, director of the Hermitage, recalled the experience of frontline archaeologists. Modern archaeologists working in conflict zones largely follow the methods developed in the 40s. They create detailed maps of monuments, train local populations in the basics of conservation, and organize urgent evacuation of museum collections. In Syria and Iraq, international teams of specialists, risking their lives, document destruction and save what can still be saved. The experience of documenting war crimes against cultural heritage has gained particular relevance. Modern specialists, like their predecessors 80 years ago, meticulously record all instances of destruction of historical monuments, creating an evidence base for future trials. The legacy of frontline archaeologists also lives on in educational programs. Leading universities worldwide have introduced courses on the protection of cultural heritage in emergencies, which include the study of the experience of the Second World War. Future specialists are taught not only restoration techniques, but also methods of working in extreme conditions. The main lesson that frontline archaeologists left us can be simply formulated. Culture is not a luxury that can be neglected in difficult times. It is the foundation upon which a people's identity, its past, and its future are built. and this foundation must be protected with the same selflessness as one protects one's native land.